Hello everybody, this is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal Contenders video series. So, just 2 days ago I dropped the full deck tag on the vastly successful Icaria Black on you guys that Kamado and I used to dominate last weekend, but as we all know the game and metagame moves pretty fast, so by the time I recorded the deck it already was kind of like falling out of favor. People were heavily adapting their decks and deck choices to make sure they not just get crushed by the myriad of people playing the deck. So the format got quite hostile, which is why we were not doing that well in the deck tech and why people have been moving away from it fairly quickly. In tournaments it's a bit different. The deck is still, thanks to having a sideboard, much better positioned in tournaments because decks like Skycrack that are really good on ladder against it are very beatable in tournaments if you have the right sideboard like the Granite and Drones that I was running. But yeah, anyway, the deck needed to vastly change to survive in the currently hostile ladder metagame and also in order to get an advantage in the mirror. And this is where Shine's idea came in. He was ranked 2 recently with something based on Icaria Black loosely, but very different with more units and more proactive. So let's take a look. So credit to Shine for coming up with like the core idea, core direction for this. This is not his deck. It's fairly different from his deck, but it is based on his idea, on his concept. So shout out to him here. You can find his original deck list on Eternal Warcry. He posted it there after being ranked 2. So he, for example, had Harsh Roll, which I think at this point is not very good anymore once you move the deck in a direction like this, and you can just deal with these things in a different manner. Okay, so let's take a look at the deck. The deck basically changes from like a super reactive removal based control deck that just Icarias and Daishos people at some point to a good stuff sort of removal mid-range deck topping out at Icaria. So as units we have 4 Alchemist, 4 Whirling Duo, 2 Statuary Maiden, 4 Highwayman, 4 Makto and 3 Icaria. So the core idea of basically adding Stonepowder, Alchemist, Highwayman and Makto into Icaria Black over some of the other cards was the idea of Shine that inspired me to build this particular deck and list. Normally jamming Makto or Alchemist, for example, into Icaria Black just alone doesn't really like do a whole lot, which is why I didn't like it, because the deck blanks removal really well, and then if you start playing a few cards, you make these cards better. But if you start playing enough of these good units, then it starts making sense again, basically. I tried 4 Alchemist, for example, in Icaria Black over 4 other cards, and they felt underwhelming. But in the context of this deck, with like the whole plan changing, they start to really shine and become really good. So I basically run duos instead of harsh rolls, sort of, giving the deck more lifesteal, giving the deck more charge, which also synergizes really well with Icaria. I think if you don't run harsh roll and generally are less control and more mid-range good stuff focused, the Force Icaria becomes debatable because the card is still pretty slow and clunky and hard to cast, especially when the color requirements go up to double shadow on 4 and 5 for Makto and Highwayman, making it even harder to support Icaria properly, basically. So yeah, that's why I shaved an Icaria. Then the Highwayman is just a really great sort of value card. It shoots down small opposing units. The Warcry has nice utility with Makto and Alchemist Revenge, but also buffing a duo or an Icaria, for example, is just really good, or Runehammer, because a 6/6 Icaria suddenly potentially forces the opponent to jump with their 5/5 Icaria or Makto rather than trading. And yeah, Makto is just really good against all sorts of slower decks, because they often have very limited ways of shutting him down, and if they can't shut him down, he'll eventually take over the game. The 2 Maiden are the latest addition, partially due to a lot of the mirror being around on ladder, and also that the card comes in handy against other Stonepowder Alchemist Makto decks like this Nostrix Fallenport deck that runs bows and stuff like that. And it's also a pretty nice card against aggressive decks. I considered Enforcer as an alternative. The problem with Enforcer is that it is more fragile at 3 health, so it's less good against aggro as like a blocker, for example. The Cudgels have nice synergy with the life steal units, and yeah, the other thing is Enforcer would turn on Annihilate, which is at the moment completely blank against the deck, which is a good thing, so I wanted to keep that up. And in small numbers, Maiden has higher impact than Enforcer as well. And yeah, Makto and so on has been explained, so let's talk about the spells. We still have a pretty big removal suit, 4 Torch, 2 Annihilate, 2 Vanquish, 3 Slay. Yes, 3 Slay, because the card is clunky and we have a lot of 3-cost cards and the deck's power is already kind of slow and clunky, so it's important to spread out things, and the card is just not the most efficient as a removal. It's just universal but not efficient. So yeah, rather than playing like 2, 1, and 4, or 3 and 4 and 0, this is the removal suit I chose. I worked with this deck a bit, on this deck a bit together with Patrick Dickman again. We've been like looking at it together and playing it a bit together and discussing some card choices, and he was the one pushing cutting the 4 Slay if we want to make room for another card. Initially it was another Rise, and now it basically became a Maiden. And I very much agree with it. I briefly tried 0 Annihilate because of the mirror and tried like 4 Slay and 3 Vanquish, but you can't just can't do that. The Rakano matchup suddenly becomes really, really bad. Since Vanquish actually is really bad against Rakano most of the time right now, because a lot of the lists don't run any weapons anymore, and then you have these Vanquishes sitting in hand until they start drawing like bigger Warcry units, but that's not where you need your removal. You need your removal early to buy yourself time to set up, and then later it doesn't really matter what they have because we overpower them anyway, so having your removal useless early basically is the difference between winning and losing, and Annihilate is extremely good against them because it kills most of their annoying units. And also being a fast spell comes in handy too. And I mean, Torch is just amazing. Very versatile and better than ever right now with all these duos and Highwaymans and all that stuff floating around and killing all units in the aggro decks. Wanted Poster is still really good and well supported here with the 11 removal plus Highwayman and Favor pings and Runehammers, and Rise for Runehammer and Highwayman pings. So drawing cards in a deck full of powerful cards is particularly powerful because the cards are gonna be super high impact that you draw with it, and the card is so cheap and cost efficient that even in a kind of clunky mid-rangey deck like this, a draw 2 is really strong. Unlike, for example, Wisdom, which I always hated in mid-range decks because it's so slow and clunky, and the card quality in those decks was also not as high as this, and the average cost probably also higher. Then we have 4 Quarry, because the deck doesn't really want to play any like early units. There are none that are like as powerful as the other units here, and therefore we would rather spend our early game developing our clunky power base and playing cheap removal and drawing cards with Poster and Quarry. Also, Quarry is really nice if you get to reduce one of these powerful cards by 1 in cost. Makes them even more powerful if you can play them a turn ahead of the curve, basically. I had to trim the 3rd hammer to fit the Maidens, which I'm not super happy about. Basically the last change that I made was cutting the 4th Slay and the 3rd hammer to fit 2 Maidens. It is a bit experimental, but in the mirror it's extremely strong against the Maktos and Alchemists, and it's generally just pretty well-rounded good unit. But if you for some reason decide you don't like them or don't need them, just play another Hammer and another Slay instead, because Hammer is still really, really good, especially with Icaria and Rise, and I would normally like to have 3, but you can also only play so many 4s. The deck now has like 10 4-cost cards, which is pretty clunky already. And yeah, Rise is just really nice with the Revenge units, basically turning Rise into a 4-cost version of a Makto. Like, it's either a 4-cost 7/5 Makto if you have a Revenge Makto floating, or a 4-cost 4/2 lifesteal that drains the opponent for 2, and in both cases also cantrips, replaces itself. And yeah, the card is still a bit clunky and slow, so you can only play so many, but playing a turn 5 Makto, having it die, and then turn 6 rising for it wins a lot of games on its own, basically. And last but not least, we still have 4 Seek. Shine only ran 3, which I think is absurdly ambitious when Icaria Black's power base was already like pushed and the requirements were that much lower, and now with this you need the 4 Seeks even more. And then I have 2 Favor, he had 3. 2 Favor is pretty nice. They help the deck even further to survive the early game, and later you can pair them with Hammer or Highwayman to shoot for 2 or hit something for 5, or simply pop an Aegis for the removal, like on an opposing Icaria and stuff. Then we have 10 Sigils, that's like the bare minimum I want to run in a deck like this to make it run reasonably smooth. In addition to the Favors and Seeks helping you with later seeds. Unfortunately we have to run to Rakano banner, because we need more Rakano duels basically to fit all the colors and be able to run Favor. Like, if we wouldn't run banner, we couldn't run Favor basically to get all the colors. And then we have like the 5 seeds and the 8 crests, giving us 18 Justice, 18 Fire, and 16 Shadow plus 2 Favor, so 18 of each in total, or like the double and triple costs, which is solid. Like, that's basically what you can realistically achieve in a deck like this with this heavy requirements. Also, I would just call this deck Icaria's Revenge, because it's basically built around the new 8-card Revenge package of Makto and the buffed Alchemist, which, since its buff, has exploded in popularity, and there's a lot of Alchemist Makto Revenge grind decks basically, and this is still in a way an Icaria deck, so I dubbed this Icaria's Revenge. It's also kind of a fitting name, I think, given that there was Icaria Black, people pushed it out of the metagame hating on it, and then the deck comes back with this transformation as a revenge, sort of, and taking revenge on the metagame. So this is Icaria's Revenge on Icaria being pushed out of the metagame in Icaria Black, so to speak. So kind of a nice multi-level metaphor wordplay type of name. So I hope it catches on and sticks, because we need a name to separate it from Icaria Black, because the decks play vastly different even though they contain a lot of similarities. Alright, that's it for the deck. The deck is really cool, really fun to play, really powerful, and also has a lot of play to it, a lot of decision making, which makes it even more interesting. I enjoy it a lot, and it has been doing really well for me. As you saw during the last deck tech video, I was in the top 70, now I'm in the top 20, and I was in like the top 10, the highest was like 8s yesterday, partially on the back of this deck and some other decks too. This deck got me from like 28 or something to rank 8 or rank 5 even yesterday at the highest point. So yeah, it's definitely pretty powerful. Alright, that's it for the deck tech. As usual, I'm gonna hop into some games, show it in action, show you guys how it plays out, how to pilot it, what to focus on, and see how we're doing on ladder. And let's hope we can climb back into the top 10 during the video. So stay tuned for the first game coming up next.